Are you passionate about hybrid production and turning your creative work into sustainable revenue? Then you're in the right place. I've set up Filmmaker Alchemy as a YouTube membership on this channel to share everything I've learned from 20 plus years in production, balancing client work, content creation, and passive income. This isn't about going viral, it's about working smarter, building a business, and creating art that fulfills you both creatively and financially. If you're ready to dive deeper into the craft, explore exclusive insights, and connect with like-minded creators, become a member of the channel. Membership is simple, flexible, and packed with value, so join today. As you probably already know, Lumix has some awesome cameras these days. In front of me, I have the ones I'm currently using. I've got the S9, the S5 Mark II, and the new GH7. I'm gonna show you why I use each one of these cameras, how I use each one of them, because I do think each one provides its own distinct value. I'm gonna go over all of that. If you wanna get the most out of your Lumix cameras, I recommend you become a channel member where I have Filmmaker Alchemy set up, which really goes into the nitty-gritty of what these cameras do and how they operate and how I personally use them to get the most out of them. But in this video, I'm gonna go over each of these bodies, why I think they're useful, and how you might want to use them too. I'm not gonna tell you what you should do, I'm just gonna show you what I do. So let's start with the biggest, bulkiest, giant in relative terms. This is actually quite small. So this is my hybrid setup with the S5 Mark II. And you can see I've got it rigged out with the Shinobi monitor up top, the small rig battery on the back of that powering the monitor, and then that runs USB-C to the S5 Mark II body for powering basically all day battery life. I think you can get around 5 hours continuous use on the S5 Mark II with this setup and battery configuration. You could obviously get more if you turn the things off throughout the day. So you can get a lot of battery life from one of these small rig batteries. I really recommend them. And I should say that all this kind of stuff mixes and matches. So you can kind of use this with other setups, but this is just how I do it. I've got this bottom plate on the S5 Mark II. I've got the Sigma 28-70 on the front here as my lens, HDMI cord, obviously, to monitor, and that's pretty much it. You can do so much with a rig like this, and I specifically like the S5 Mark II because it has phase detect autofocus. In fact, all of these cameras have phase detect autofocus. So that kind of already puts them on an equal playing field in terms of performance, how you can use it. Reliable, consistent autofocus in video has been the Achilles heel for the Lumix system for the longest time. The other Achilles heel of Lumix for the longest time has been small sensor size. Well, the S5 Mark II is a full frame camera. The S is that designation for Lumix. The S9 is also a full frame camera. The reason I like to use the S5 Mark II is because it gives me basically the ultimate picture quality I can get out of a camera like this, getting all those benefits of the Lumix system. Open gate, shutter angle, some really robust video codecs. I think that still to this day, for whatever reason, Lumix cameras tend to be the best balance of hybrid between video and photo. So I can take beautiful portraits with the S5 Mark II, and I can also shoot great video. Obviously, we've got 422 color, 10-bit color, V-Log, all the bells and whistles. And I don't want to get into any of the scientific tests of the dynamic range and the performance, but in general, the S5 Mark II works great. I did not opt for the X version. I actually found a good deal on just the base S5 Mark II. Obviously, the X gives you some additional video features, but those are features that I personally don't use all that often, so I didn't really think the X designation was worth it, aside from maybe just getting the cool blacked out logo. So that's how I use the S5 Mark II. It's a cleaner image than Micro Four Thirds, which we'll get into when I talk about the GH7. And just in general, I find the image very, very pleasing. There is a drawback, I guess, in that the open gate on the full frame S5 Mark II is 3:2. It's not 4:3. So if you want to pull up those aspect ratios, 3:2 is technically wider and more of like a rectangle than 4:3, which is closer to a true square, which is my ultimate goal for open gate. I hope one day we can see a camera with a square sensor. I think that'd be really, really cool in terms of getting the most out of that feature. But in general, it works great. The autofocus is awesome. The stabilization is awesome. You even have the advanced like high stabilization modes on the S5 Mark II. So it can do everything you need it to. And even though it doesn't have any kind of like built-in bulky fan like you get on the GH6, on the GH7, and even on the S1H, I believe that has kind of a larger fan. The S5 Mark II does have smaller fans up top by the viewfinder, and I find that to be perfectly sufficient for anything I need to do. And I'm in Arizona where it gets quite warm during the summer. I've shot with this camera outside and reasonable conditions, the performance I would expect from any camera. and it has not overheated on me, not even once. So I'm really happy with the S5 Mark II. You can get so much out of it, and it's great. Let's compare that to the S9, which is the other full-frame Lumix camera that's newer, more popular, really small, really compact, as you can see. But what's interesting about that is when you compare them, obviously the S5II and the S9 look drastically different in terms of size, but that's mostly down to how I've rigged it out. The body size alone on the S5 Mark II is not really that much bigger than the S9, aside from the handheld grip, which I think the S5 Mark II is more comfortable to hold. But I do use the S9 in this configuration with the 18-40 lens, which is on here. I think it's technically the smallest zoom lens for full frame. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but it's one of, certainly. Very, very small zoom lens. Now, the consideration here is that I kind of use the S9 as like a point and shoot. So back in the day, you'd take out your point and shoot camera, your Canon PowerShot, your Nikon Coolpix, whatever it was, and you just kind of snap photos with that kind of the point and shoot look. You know, you're not getting that super shallow depth of field. You're certainly not getting that with the 18-40 here. This is a pretty slow lens. It's a 4.5 to 6.3, I believe. So kind of slow, kind of sluggish. You're not going to be shooting a lot of like nighttime concert type stuff with this, but for those just like family candid shots, the kind of run around point and shoot, 18-40 is a pretty useful range for those wider looking shots. But again, you're not getting that shallow depth of field. You're not getting the beautiful buttery bokeh or anything like that. But in this configuration, it is quite small, quite compact, and I really enjoy using it. Just kind of fun. And of course, it shoots video as well and has a lot of the same features as the S5 Mark II. So if I need to throw up a quick B camera or C camera, I always have this, and it's small enough in this setup that it's a perfectly usable camera straight out of my bag, and I don't have to do anything to it other than put an SD card in it. And that's really it. I can just run and gun, point and shoot, and snap off some quick shots that, kind of all match, all plays nice. It's the same lens mount as the full frame L mount S5 Mark II. So same mount, same lenses. I can swap and adapt. And ultimately, it was that easy body size to just throw, like it basically fits in your kit even if you don't have room for it. It's that small, especially with this lens. So that was quite nice. And it's, one of the cheapest options out there for a full frame camera, getting those same benefits from Lumix, open gate, shutter angle, etc. in video mode, phase detect, autofocus, all kind of the same features. More or less, you're getting the same stuff nowadays. So it's really down to like how you want to use the camera. And this is what I like to do. Now, moving on to the Lumix GH7, which if you've followed me and my channel for quite a while, I've been a fan of the GH cameras all the way back to the GH1. In fact, that was kind of my first hybrid mirrorless type camera that I ever bought with my own money, the GH1 back in the day, and I've stuck with the system through the GH6 and now obviously onto the GH7. And why do I like the GH7 so much? Well, it's for one main feature, and that's the 32-bit float audio. So you can see I have the XLR2 adapter here on the top. And that works quite well for capturing, the safest audio. I can still get audio with the S5 Mark II, so that's why that's still my main primary camera that I use for pretty much everything. Running audio to it, that's fine. But if I have the option to run a second camera, I think the GH7 fits quite well in that configuration because I have a little bit better audio. If I'm setting up a second camera, it's no big deal to throw that on top. And of course, with Micro Four Thirds, you get much smaller lenses. So this is a 9mm on here right now, this 9mm lens. It's a 1.7, I believe. GH7, you're still getting that phase detect autofocus. You're getting all those great benefits of the Lumix setup. It has the giant fan in the back, so it's not going to overheat. It's got the CF Express Type B card as well as the SD card, so you're getting slightly faster card speeds with those CF Express Type B. It just in general is kind of the video workhorse and really the first step towards what I imagine Lumix will want to do if they're smart, where they'll expand their full frame lineup to really bring us that S1H Mark II or something like that. But until that shows up, until we have a full frame camera in the S series that can do 32-bit float, that has some of these unique features of the GH7, and that's really the only one, is the 32-bit float. There are some other things on the GH7 that are unique, but they're things I don't use. So for me, it's down to that 32-bit float. I imagine if an S1H comes around, Mark II version that is, and it can do 32-bit float or something like that, I imagine I'd go that direction. But for having a camera this small, this compact, with kind of that same level of performance, this system works quite well. I've been shooting Micro Four Thirds for quite some time. I've got tons of glass for the system. None of that has gone bad. The GH7 is brand new, still keeps up with the best features. And there are some unique things about Micro Four Thirds that make it special. I talk about it a lot, but that Leica 10-25 lens doesn't really have an equivalent on full frame for the L mount. There's certain lenses for Micro Four Thirds, because it's been around for so long, that is really, really built out. Anything you could want to shoot, given your particular scenario. For me, it's the 10-25. That lens covers such a good range. The full frame equivalent would be like a 20-50, and something fairly fast, like an f2, an f2.8 would put it close to the same realm as what you get on Micro Four Thirds. So there's really still good reasons, I think, to shoot Micro Four Thirds. The size is relatively small considering the lens, and the configuration is just nice. It's got basically every video feature you could ever want for a hybrid. That's what the H stands for, I believe, in GH. I actually don't know that for a fact, but I've always assumed GH stood for G and then hybrid. Maybe that's what S1H stands for as well, hybrid. But I really like it. The only downside to Micro Four Thirds compared to the full frame, and why I would still pick the S5 Mark II as my main go-to camera if you're deciding between any of these cameras, is that Micro Four Thirds, just for whatever reason, the physical nature of the smaller sensor, given the higher resolutions, you're fitting more pixels in a smaller surface area, equivalent if it's 25 megapixels to 25 megapixels on full frame. And those pixels are just noisier. I imagine they're smaller from a physical standpoint on the sensor because they have to be. They have less surface area to breathe, so to speak. So when you compare the full frame footage to the Micro Four Thirds footage, you'll see that Micro Four Thirds just has that kind of grain, that texture, that noise pattern. Not noisy as in the shadows, you're using a high ISO or anything like that. It's just the inherent nature of the picture has a little bit of grain, of texture, of pattern. Some people really like that. For me, I prefer when I'm looking at the footage and editing to see the full frame stuff because it is just cleaner. There are some considerations, though, with full frame that make it difficult to get close-ups because your depth of field is so shallow if you're using, equivalent apertures between them. So it is a little bit of a learning curve either way, whichever direction you're going. If you're looking to go Micro Four Thirds with something like the GH7, it has some awesome features, but just be prepared. When you look at the footage in your editing software, it's going to look a little more grainy or noisy, whatever you want to call it, just texture. Again, it's not a high ISO noise. It's just, I don't know how to describe it without showing you. Unfortunately, I can't show you because this is kind of one of the benefits as well, is that by the time it gets uploaded anywhere, all that noise gets compressed away. So if it's only really for you and your own sanity when you're looking at the footage, the moment you upload it with compression, especially YouTube or wherever, most of that goes away, and then they end up becoming more or less equivalent, and no end consumer, no end viewer is going to notice. However, that might not always be the case on the photography side. So if you were going to shoot photography and you want the cleanest pictures, I would recommend full frame. It's been the standard for so long for a good reason, but Micro Four Thirds still works and is great. So if you're looking to go with any of these cameras, I would say go with all three if you can. I think each one has a purpose, has a reason to exist, and still exists in my kit to this day because that's just the way it works. And I still have GH6s and GH5s that I use from time to time, depending on how many cameras I need for whatever the project is. So all this stuff still has a life, still has a purpose. None of it really it gets stale or, it needs to go to retirement. You can sell it if you need to, afford the cost of something new. But for me, I like to buy equipment that I know is going to last for a really long time and get the most out of it. So I'm always looking for those features that I actually need, that I actually want, that I can actually put to full use. Whereas, some other cameras are just like variants of more or less the same thing. And that is getting to be the case too with Lumix, to be fair. I'm not saying, these are unique in that they all do something very particular, but for me and how I use them, they actually each serve a nice little purpose. Grab the S9 when I want to just do that point and shoot, really simple, minimalist style of photo or video. Rely on the S5 Mark II as the kind of bread and butter workhorse for everything I do. If I'm shooting hybrid and I'm shooting video and I'm shooting photo and I need just something that does it all, that's the S5 Mark II. And then if I need to supplement with something, that gets me that better audio quality, that offers up an amazing B camera that I have tons of lenses for, that gives me that extra telephoto reach that Micro Four Thirds is easier to get, that's what I'll grab. the GH7. And so I use all three in different configurations from time to time. But this is kind of the core package main kit. And I would say that all of these are worthwhile investing in if you can afford to. Otherwise, pick one. And if I had to offer one suggestion for just the one to get, it's the S5 Mark II. It's very, very popular for very good reason. It's an incredible camera. I don't see any downsides other than there are situations where you'll get some moire, some aliasing, because there is no optical low pass filter in the S5 Mark II. So it's pretty sharp. And you can compensate either with post-production filtering. If you're taking photos, there's some moire reduction software now, or you can just look at lens filtration, trying to find a way to reduce that amount of fine pixel detail. I think you can actually send the S5 Mark II off to get modified. There's a company out there that will install an optical low pass filter. I have not done that, but I've been tempted to, just to get that ultimate image quality out of the camera. So far, I've been able to kind of work around it. Again, trying to just do my best to avoid those moire patterns. They don't come up a lot, but they do come up, and I would definitely want to warn you about them. So that's the only consideration with the S5 Mark II. Other than that, the crop, to Super 35 when you're shooting 60 frames a second, I don't find to be that big of a deal. It just kind of gives me more range with the lenses I have. So if I need to crop in a little bit and I need, want to get that look for 60, it's really fine. It's just, you just get used to it. That's not like a problem or a deal breaker. I know a lot of people want that full frame 60 capability, which other cameras certainly can do from Sony and whoever else. But for Lumix, for me, for the price, for all the other features, it's one of those minor, little considerations that's at the end of the day, not really a big deal. You might think it will hurt you more than it actually does. And if it is a deal breaker, then obviously it's a deal breaker and you don't get the S5 Mark II. For me though, and how I shoot, hasn't been a problem. The crop mode in 60 has been totally fine. And really all these cameras I'm super, super happy with. And, really that's pretty much it. I don't have much else to say other than they're all great in their own way. So if something like that makes sense for you and you want to check them out, hopefully that helps shine a little light if you're making a decision or something like that. I imagine that's why you'd watch a video like this. You just wanted to hear, hey, which one do you like? Well, the S5 Mark II, I think, is where it's at right now. Of course, that'll change in the future, but for value, performance, all that stuff, the S5 Mark II is awesome. And then if you can supplement with some of these other options, I think that's smart too.